The first time my older brother asked if he could stay with me, I didn't hesitate. Looking back now, that was probably the easiest decision I ever made. And the most expensive one, even though it never cost me a single dollar. It nearly cost me my peace, my confidence, and the feeling that my own home actually belonged to me. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 32 years old, and 2 years ago, I bought my first house completely on my own. No inheritance, no trust fund. No generous relatives writing checks. Just 10 years of long workdays, skipped vacations, cheap apartments, and more frozen dinners than I care to admit. Every room inside that little three-bedroom craftsman held a memory of something I had sacrificed to earn it. The hardwood floors reminded me of the second job I worked every Saturday for almost 18 months. The kitchen island reminded me of the promotion I accepted even though it meant 60-hour weeks. Even the tiny backyard reminded me of the apartment balcony where I used to sit at night wondering if I'd ever have a place that actually belonged to me. When I finally received the keys, I remember standing in the empty living room with tears running down my face. There wasn't a single piece of furniture inside yet, but it already felt like home. It wasn't the biggest house in the neighborhood. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect. It was mine. That mattered more than anything. Growing up, nothing had ever really been mine. My older brother, Michael, always came first. If there was one last piece of cake, he got it because he was still growing. If there was money for only one extracurricular activity, it went to Michael because he needed confidence. If I earned something, I was expected to share it because that's what good sisters do. My parents weren't cruel people. They loved me. I never doubted that. But love and fairness aren't always the same thing. Somehow, Michael's problems always became everyone's responsibility. Mine were expected to stay manageable. My mother had a phrase she repeated so often I can still hear it in my sleep. "Who's your older brother, Sarah?" Sometimes those 5 words explained everything. Sometimes they explained nothing. Michael was 39 when everything fell apart. He lost another job after arguing with his supervisor. That wasn't unusual. According to Michael, every boss he'd ever had was incompetent. Every company underestimated him. Every coworker was jealous. Somehow, nothing was ever his fault. A few months later, his marriage ended. His wife moved out, filed for divorce, and refused to discuss reconciliation. Again, according to Michael, she had become impossible to live with. I never asked for details because every conversation somehow ended the same way, with Michael explaining why the rest of the world had failed him. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, my phone rang while I was making pasta after work. I looked at the screen and saw his name. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. "Hey?" I answered. There was a long pause before he spoke. "Sarah, I need a favor." Those words should have warned me. Instead, they activated years of family conditioning. "What's wrong?" I asked. He sighed heavily. "I'm between places right now. Just temporary. A couple of weeks until I get back on my feet." I stared out the kitchen window at the rain hitting the fence. "Oh, temporary? 2 weeks. Maybe 3. I asked where he was staying now. Another pause. "My lease ended. I didn't renew it." He left out the part about not paying rent for 3 months. I learned that much later. At the time, I simply pictured my older brother sitting alone somewhere with nowhere to go. "You can stay here," I said. "Really?" His relief sounded genuine. "Of course. Family helps family." The words came out before I even thought about them. I smiled after I hung up, believing I had done the right thing. I spent the next evening preparing the guest room. Fresh sheets, clean towels, extra blankets. I even stopped by the grocery store after work and bought foods I knew Michael liked, even though I never ate most of them myself. I told myself that everyone deserves a second chance. Maybe losing his marriage and his job would humble him. Maybe this would be the fresh start he needed. He arrived Saturday morning with a sub full of boxes instead of the couple of suitcases I had imagined. "That's a lot for 2 weeks, I joked. He laughed. "Most of it's just stuff I don't trust in storage." I accepted the explanation because I wanted to. We carried everything inside together. By lunchtime, the guest room looked more like a permanent bedroom than temporary housing. I noticed it, but I ignored the little voice in the back of my head telling me something felt off. The first afternoon actually went well. We ordered pizza, watched a baseball game, and talked about old family vacations. For a few hours, he felt like the brother I remembered from childhood before life made everything complicated. Before going to bed, I told him, "Take your time getting settled. Don't worry about anything. He smiled. Thanks, kid. He hadn't called me that in years. I thought maybe we were finally rebuilding our relationship. Sunday morning, I woke up planning to make coffee before doing laundry. Instead, I walked into the kitchen and stopped so suddenly I almost dropped my phone. Every cabinet had been reorganized overnight. My coffee mugs were gone from their usual shelf. The plates were stacked somewhere else. The silverware drawer had been completely rearranged. Even my spice rack had been alphabetized. Michael stood at the counter drinking coffee like nothing unusual had happened. He noticed my expression and grinned. Morning. I looked around the kitchen again. What happened? He gestured proudly toward the cabinets. I fixed the layout. Trust me. This makes a lot more sense. I stood there silently, staring at the room I had carefully organized over 2 years. Everything was technically still there. It just wasn't where I had left it. It was the smallest possible change. Barely worth mentioning. And somehow it felt much bigger than a few moved dishes. By Monday morning, the kitchen no longer felt like mine. I opened 3 different cabinets before finding my coffee mug. Then discovered Michael had moved the coffee itself into a glass jar labeled Morning Essentials. He had also thrown away the old container because he said it made the counter look cluttered. I stood there holding the empty jar lid, trying to understand why I felt so irritated over something so small. Michael walked in wearing sweatpants and carrying his phone. You'll get used to it, he said. The old setup was inefficient. I told him I had liked the old setup. He shrugged. You only liked it because you were used to it. That became his favorite kind of answer. Not an apology. Not even an explanation. Just a calm statement suggesting that my opinion was based on ignorance while his was based on logic. I reminded myself that he was going through a difficult time. Divorce, unemployment, debt. People sometimes try to control small things when the rest of their lives feel unstable. That was the excuse I gave him. It was also the first excuse I gave myself. 2 days later, I came home from work and my phone disconnected from the Wi-Fi. I tried the password twice before calling Michael from the hallway. Did something happen to the internet? He appeared at the top of the stairs. Change the password. I waited for him to continue. He didn't. Why? I asked. The old one was too easy to guess. The old password was a random string of letters and numbers the service provider had assigned. I asked him what the new one was. He smiled like he had solved a difficult problem. Mitchellholm 39. 30. 9 was his age. You used your age in my Wi-Fi password, I said. It's easier to remember. I told him that changing account settings without asking wasn't acceptable. His expression tightened just a little. Sarah, it's a password. You're acting like I refinanced the house. I hated how easily he made me sound unreasonable. I took the password and went upstairs without arguing. The next change involved the thermostat. I preferred the house cool at night. Michael decided 76 degrees was more economical, even though he wasn't paying the utility bill. When I lowered it, he raised it again. The third time, I found a handwritten note taped beside the controls, please leave at 76. I pulled the note down and asked him not to put instructions around my home. He leaned against the wall and folded his arms. Someone has to think long-term. You waste money without realizing it. I almost laughed. He had been unemployed for more than a year, had moved in without offering rent, and was now explaining financial responsibility to me. Instead, I said, I'm the one paying the bill. That doesn't mean you're paying it wisely. The confidence in his voice stunned me. He didn't sound embarrassed. He didn't even sound defensive. He sounded like a man correcting an employee. Over the next week, the changes kept coming. He began switching off lights while I was still using the room. He created a grocery list and crossed out anything he considered unnecessary. He criticized the cleaning service I hired twice a month, saying I could save money by doing everything myself. When packages arrived, he asked what I had ordered and how much it cost. At first, I answered because the questions sounded casual. Then I realized he was keeping track. One evening, a small box containing new headphones arrived. Michael turned it over in his hands before giving it to me. You already have headphones. Those stopped working. You could have repaired them. They cost $20. He sighed. That attitude is exactly why people never get ahead. I stared at him. Michael, you're living in the house I bought. His face changed, only for a second, but I saw it. The warm older brother act disappeared. replaced by something cold and offended. You don't have to throw that in my face. I'm not throwing anything in your face. I'm asking you to stop managing my money. He walked away muttering that I was too sensitive. That night, my mother called. Michael had already spoken to her. I could tell by the careful tone she used. Your brother says there's been some tension. I sat on the edge of my bed and closed my eyes. He's changing things without asking. He's probably trying to help. Mom, he changed my Wi-Fi password. He tells me what I'm allowed to buy. He leaves instructions beside the thermostat. She gave a soft laugh, the kind meant to make a problem feel smaller. That sounds like Michael. He's always liked structure? It's my house? There was a pause. Of course it is. But he's under a lot of pressure right now. Losing a job and a marriage at the same time would affect anyone. I waited for her to say he still needed to respect me. She didn't. Instead, she repeated the sentence I had heard my whole life. Who's your older brother? Sarah. Let him feel useful. I looked around my bedroom. Every payment, every repair, every piece of furniture in that room had come from my work. Somehow, even here, I was still being asked to make myself smaller so Michael could feel bigger. How long am I supposed to do that? I asked. Until he gets back on his feet. And what if he isn't trying? My mother's voice hardened. Don't be unkind. That ended the conversation. My father texted later that night. He didn't ask what had happened. He simply wrote, Your mother says you and Michael are having trouble. Try to keep the peace. I read it 3 times. That was my father's role in our family. He never chose the wrong side openly. He just stayed silent until the wrong side won. The next morning, Michael was already sitting at the kitchen table when I came downstairs. A neat stack of papers rested beside his coffee. He pushed one toward me. I made something that should help us avoid misunderstandings. The page had been printed in color and slipped inside a clear plastic cover. At the top, in large bold letters, were 2 words: house rules. I thought he was joking until I looked at his face. He was completely serious. I honestly expected to laugh. I thought the laminated page had to be some kind of joke, maybe Michael's strange attempt at making light of our arguments. Then I started reading. Rule Fay 1 in quiet hours begin at 900 p.m. Rule Fay 2a. All visitors must be approved in advance. Rule Fay 3 meals should be planned every Sunday to reduce waste. Rule Fay 4t shoes stay by the front door. Rule Fay 5 every resident contributes to keeping the house orderly. I slowly lowered the page and looked at him. You're serious? He nodded without hesitation. Completely. Michael, this is my house. Exactly, he replied. And that's why it needs consistency. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He actually believed he was helping me. Or maybe he'd convinced himself that was true. You made house rules for a house you don't own. I made guidelines, he corrected. There's a difference. I stared at him for several seconds before setting the laminated sheet back on the table. I'm not following this. His smile disappeared. You haven't even tried it yet. I don't need to try permission slips in my own home. I picked up my coffee and headed toward the stairs. Behind me, I heard him sigh dramatically. You're letting your emotions get in the way of common sense. I didn't answer. If I had, the conversation would have become a fight, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I left for work feeling angry for the first time since he moved in. The frustration stayed with me all day. Every meeting felt longer than usual because my mind kept drifting back to that laminated page sitting on my kitchen table. I even caught myself wondering whether I was overreacting. That thought made me angry at myself. Somewhere along the way, Michael had become so confident that I had started questioning my own instincts. When I arrived home that evening, I noticed another change. The laminated house rules sheet wasn't on the table anymore. It had been framed inside a clear acrylic holder and placed beside the coffee machine where everyone entering the kitchen would immediately see it. Michael looked up from the couch. Looks more professional there, don't you think? I walked over, picked it up, and set it in a drawer. Don't do that again. He didn't argue. Instead, he gave me a disappointed look, almost like I had embarrassed him. I'm trying to improve things. Then start by asking before you change them. For the next few days, he stopped mentioning the rules. I should have realized that didn't mean he had given up. It only meant he had moved on to enforcing them without asking. Thursday evening, Ethan came over after work. We'd been dating for almost a year. He wasn't flashy or dramatic. He was the kind of person who always remembered birthdays, brought soup when someone was sick, and never showed up empty-handed. That night he arrived carrying takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. "Thought I'd save you from cooking," he said with a smile. We had barely unpacked the food when Michael walked into the kitchen. He looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 8:12. "Didn't you read the schedule?" he asked Ethan. Ethan frowned. "What schedule?" Michael folded his arms. "Visitors are supposed to be gone by 8. Ethan laughed because he assumed Michael was joking. I almost wished he had been. Michael didn't laugh back. "I'm serious." The room became painfully quiet. Ethan looked at me. "Sarah." I felt my face burning. "Ignore him," I said. Michael shook his head. "No, actually, this is exactly why we needed house rules. Boundaries matter." I put my fork down. "Michael, stop. I'm only trying to keep some order in my house." He opened his mouth again, but this time I didn't let him continue. "You don't get to decide when my guests leave." His expression hardened. "You always make everything personal." "Because it is personal." Ethan quietly stood up. "Maybe I should head home." "You don't have to," I said immediately. He gave me a small smile. "It's okay. I'll call you later." He left with the untouched food still sitting on the counter. The front door closed gently behind him, but the silence that followed felt deafening. I turned toward Michael. "That was completely inappropriate." "He'll survive." "That's not the point." "No," Michael replied calmly. "The point is that this house needs structure, and somebody has to be willing to enforce it." I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because I couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. "You're unemployed, living in my guest room, and somehow you've convinced yourself you're in charge." For the first time since he'd moved in, I saw genuine anger flash across his face. "Being unemployed doesn't make me useless." "Who never said it did?" "You implied it." He walked upstairs before I could answer. I stood alone in the kitchen staring at 2 containers of untouched pad thai growing cold on the counter. The next Saturday, I woke up to unfamiliar voices downstairs. I pulled on a sweatshirt and walked into the living room, where Michael was giving 2 men a tour of the house. They looked about his age, both holding coffee cups I recognized from my own cabinet. Michael noticed me and smiled. "Morning." One of the men nodded politely. "Beautiful place you've got." Before I could answer, Michael said, "I've been making a lot of improvements since I got here." Improvements? As if he owned the place. I forced a smile and introduced myself. Neither man seemed to realize they were standing inside my home, not Michael's. Throughout the morning, I watched my brother point out rooms, explain his ideas for rearranging furniture, and casually mention changes he planned to make. Every sentence started with, "I think we should or, "I'm going to." Not once did he say, "I'll ask Sarah." Not once did he acknowledge that every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every repair belonged to me. After his friends finally left, I began collecting empty coffee mugs from the living room. One of them had been left on the windowsill where I usually kept a framed picture of my grandparents. The photograph was gone. I searched the room before finally finding it sitting face down inside a drawer beneath the television. I carried it back to the windowsill and gently wiped away the dust. "What are you doing?" Michael asked from behind me. I held up the frame. "Why was this in a drawer?" He shrugged. It didn't match the room anymore. I looked at the picture for a long moment before placing it back exactly where it belonged. "Nothing in this house gets moved again without asking me." He smiled. A calm, confident smile that somehow bothered me more than if he had shouted. "You'll thank me eventually," he said. I froze. He didn't know it, but those 5 words changed everything. Because for the first time, I realized Michael truly believed this wasn't temporary anymore. And if he believed that, what else was he planning? The question followed me for the rest of the weekend. What else was Michael planning? Until then, I had treated every incident like a separate problem. The rearranged kitchen, the new Wi-Fi password, the thermostat note, the rules, Ethan being pushed out, my grandparents' photograph hidden in a drawer. I had been looking at them one at a time because that made them easier to excuse. But once I stopped doing that, they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Michael wasn't just making himself comfortable. He was replacing my choices with his own. On Monday morning, I worked from home because I had a video conference with a client in another time zone. Michael knew I needed quiet, yet he spent most of the morning talking loudly on the phone in the hallway outside my office. At first, I assumed it was a job interview. That made me willing to tolerate the noise. Then I heard him laugh and say, "No, I'm not taking something beneath my level just to say I'm working." I stopped typing. His voice lowered, but not enough. They offered me an operations position, but the salary was insulting. I told them no. He had told our mother 2 days earlier that employers were refusing to give him a chance. I sat very still, listening as he complained about another interview he had canceled because the office required 3 days a week in person. When the call ended, I opened the shared family email account my mother still used for birthday plans and holiday invitations. Michael had once asked me to help update his resume, so I knew which email address he used for job applications. I wasn't trying to invade his privacy. I told myself I was only checking something he had already discussed openly. Still, my hands felt cold as I searched his name in the inbox. Several automated messages appeared. Interview confirmed, application withdrawn, offer declined, follow-up requested. The dates covered nearly 4 months. Some were for jobs similar to the one he had lost. Others paid less but would have been enough for him to begin supporting himself. He had declined all of them. One message from a hiring manager read, "We were disappointed to hear you are no longer interested after accepting the final interview." Another thanked him for considering an offer that included benefits and remote work. He had responded that the role did not reflect his leadership experience. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. He wasn't waiting for the right opportunity. He was waiting for a life that required no compromise. At lunch, I asked him casually how the job search was going. He opened the refrigerator, inspected the shelves, and frowned. Slow. "Nobody wants experienced people anymore. Ernie interviews. A few possibilities. Ernie offers?" He closed the refrigerator and looked at me. "Why are you interrogating me?" "I'm not. I'm asking because you said you'd only be here a few weeks." His face tightened. "Things take time." "It's been almost 2 months." "Heard I'm aware of that." His tone had the same sharpness he used whenever facts threatened the story he preferred. "I don't need daily pressure from you." He walked away before I could answer. That evening, I met Emma Brooks at a small café near my office. Emma had been my closest friend since college, and she was one of the few people who understood how my family operated. She knew that Michael had always been protected from consequences. She also knew I had spent most of my life trying not to seem resentful about it. I told her everything. Not just the house rules, but every small change leading up to them. Emma listened without interrupting. When I finished, she stirred her coffee slowly and said, "Sarah, he isn't helping you organize your home." "I know." "No, I don't think you do?" She leaned forward. "He's training you to ask permission." The words made my stomach twist. I looked away. "That sounds dramatic." "Does it?" she asked. "He decides who can visit. He changes your accounts. He questions your spending. He removes things that matter to you. Then he tells your parents you're difficult when you object." She paused. "That isn't organization. It's control." I wanted to defend Michael out of habit. I wanted to explain that he was under stress, that he had lost his job and his marriage, that he had nowhere else to go. Instead, I remembered my mother telling me to let him feel useful. "Maybe he doesn't realize what he's doing," I said. Emma's expression softened. "Does that make it acceptable?" I had no answer. Before we left, she asked whether my security cameras recorded audio. I had installed 2 indoor cameras after a break-in on my street the previous year, one facing the front entry and one covering the living room. I rarely checked them. "Why?" I asked. "Because people say honest things when they think the person they're controlling isn't listening." That night, after Michael went upstairs, I opened the camera app. Most of the footage was ordinary. Michael walking through the living room. Michael eating on the couch. Michael pacing while talking on the phone. I fast-forwarded through several days until I saw his 2 friends from Saturday. I turned up the volume. One of them asked how long he planned to stay with his sister. Michael laughed. "Long enough to get this place functioning properly." The other man said, "She doesn't mind." Michael leaned back in my chair, the one beside the window. "Sarah avoids conflict. She complains, then she adjusts." My chest tightened. The first friend glanced around. "Still, it's her house." Michael smiled. "Horn paper." I stopped the video. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Then I pressed play again. His friend asked what that meant. Michael lowered his voice. It means she has the mortgage, but I'm the one running things. She's never been good at making hard decisions. Eventually, she'll realize this setup works better. There it was, not confusion, not stress. A plan. I kept watching. Michael talked about converting my office into a larger bedroom because the guest room was too small. He mentioned asking our parents to convince me. He said Ethan was a distraction and that once I stopped seeing him, I would become more reasonable. Then he laughed and said, "This is basically my house now. She just hasn't admitted it yet." I felt something inside me go quiet. Not break, settle. Every excuse I had made for him disappeared at once. The next morning, I called his former wife. I had not spoken to Rachel since the divorce, and I expected her to ignore me. She answered on the fourth ring. When I explained why I was calling, there was a long silence. Then she said, "He's doing it to you now." She told me Michael had controlled their home the same way. He tracked her spending, decided which friends were welcome, rewrote routines, and called every objection emotional. She had not left because he lost his job. She left because losing the job made his need for control impossible to hide. "He doesn't want responsibility," she said. "He wants authority." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the laminated house rules sheet Michael had returned to the counter. I finally understood that this wasn't a temporary reaction to failure. This was who he had been for years. At 9:03 that morning, I searched for a local property attorney and scheduled the earliest appointment available. When the receptionist asked what the meeting concerned, I looked toward the hallway where Michael was still sleeping and said, "Someone in my family has forgotten whose home he's living in." The attorney's office was on the third floor of a brick building near downtown, the kind of place with frosted glass doors and a receptionist who spoke in a voice so calm it made every problem sound solvable. David Collins was in his mid-40s, with silver beginning at his temples and a habit of listening without interrupting. I told him everything from the day Michael moved into the moment. I heard him say my home was basically his. I showed him the house rules. Screenshots from the camera, copies of Michael's messages to our parents, and the email history showing he had declined multiple jobs. David read each page carefully. When he finished, he folded his hands on the desk. "First, your brother has no ownership interest in the property." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Could he claim tenant rights? Possibly some occupancy protections, depending on how long he has stayed and local requirements. But that doesn't give him authority over your home. He paused. The important thing is that you handle this correctly. No sudden lock changes. No threats. No dramatic confrontation. I almost laughed. Dramatic confrontation had never been my style. So what do? Document everything. Communicate in writing. Set a clear move-out date. And most importantly, stop debating whether your boundaries are reasonable. That last sentence stayed with me. I had spent so much energy trying to prove I wasn't selfish that I had never asked why Michael's entitlement required any explanation at all. David helped me draft a formal notice. We didn't send it yet. He suggested waiting until I had a complete record of Michael's behavior and a safe plan for the transition. "Facts are more useful than anger," he said as I gathered my papers. "Let him keep showing you who he is." On the drive home, I decided to do exactly that. I stopped arguing. When Michael moved the blender to another cabinet, I took a picture. When he sent me a text reminding me that grocery shopping should happen on Sundays, I saved it. When he wrote a weekly cleaning schedule and assigned me the bathrooms, I photographed it before removing it. I created a folder on my laptop called Household Records and backed it up online. Every note, every message, every clip from the cameras went inside. The change in me made Michael bolder. He mistook silence for surrender. Within a week, he started speaking to me as if we had settled some invisible dispute, and he had won. One morning, he left a printed budget on the kitchen island. It listed my mortgage, utilities, groceries, subscriptions, and an estimated amount I should save each month. At the bottom he had written, "Cut unnecessary spending until household income improves." I stared at the words household income. Michael had contributed nothing. He had no income at all. Yet he had begun describing my salary as something we shared. "Where did you get these numbers?" I asked. He looked up from his coffee. I estimated. "Some of these are private, not when they affect the household." I nodded slowly. folded the paper, and placed it in my bag. He smiled, probably thinking I had accepted his advice. That evening, the paper became Exhibit 18 in my folder. I also began asking questions instead of arguing. When he said the guest room was too small, I asked what he had in mind. He told me he wanted to use my home office because it had better light. I asked when he planned to move his things. He said after the weekend. I wrote down the date. When he complained that Ethan visited too often, I asked what he thought would be appropriate. Michael said once a month, with advance notice. I saved the text where he confirmed it. The more agreeable I became, the more careless he became. He stopped hiding his plans from our parents. During a Sunday video call, he told my mother, "Sarah's finally letting me get this place under control." My mother smiled. "I'm glad you two are working things out." I waited for her to ask whether I agreed. She never did. My father sat beside her, silent as usual. "Actually," I said, "I was thinking we should celebrate Dad's birthday here next month." Everyone looked surprised. My father's birthday usually involved dinner at a restaurant because my mother hated hosting. Michael leaned closer to the screen. "Here. Why not? We have the space." The word we made him smile. That could work. Within minutes, he took over the conversation. He began discussing seating, food, decorations, and the guest list. My mother looked relieved to see him enthusiastic about something. My father simply said, "Whatever's easiest." I already knew it wouldn't be easy. That was the point. After the call, Michael stood in the kitchen outlining his ideas as if I had appointed him event director. He wanted a formal dinner schedule. He wanted printed minutes. He wanted everyone assigned a task. "People respect a well-run home," he said. I smiled. "Then let's make sure everyone sees how this home is being run." He missed the meaning completely. Over the next 2 weeks, I prepared quietly. Emma helped me organize the evidence into a clear timeline. David reviewed the formal notice and agreed to attend the party as a family friend, ready to step in only if necessary. I invited Ethan, but I told him not to confront Michael no matter what happened. He looked worried. "Are you sure you want to do this in front of everyone?" "I've spent my whole life being corrected in front of everyone," I said. "This time, I'm going to tell the truth." The night before the party, Michael walked through the house with a clipboard, checking decorations and assigning last-minute duties. He handed me a page titled Event Responsibilities. My name appeared beside food service, cleanup, and guest assistance. His name appeared beside host oversight. I read it twice before looking up. Host oversight. He straightened his shoulders. Somebody has to keep everything moving. Oh, of course. He studied my face, perhaps looking for resistance. When he found none, he relaxed. "After tomorrow, Mom and Dad will finally understand why this arrangement works." I slipped the page into my folder. "I think everyone will understand a lot more than they do now." Michael smiled, convinced I meant the same thing he did. Then he walked upstairs, leaving me alone at the kitchen table with the laminated house rules in front of me and the formal move out notice sealed inside an envelope. I slept less than 3 hours the night before my dad's birthday dinner. Not because I was afraid of what I was about to do, but because I kept wondering why it had taken me so long. The evidence sitting inside my laptop wasn't complicated. There was no hidden conspiracy, no forged documents, no secret bank accounts. It was simply weeks of one person slowly convincing himself that kindness meant ownership while everyone else looked the other way. By 7 o'clock Saturday morning, Michael was already awake. He walked through the kitchen holding his clipboard like a restaurant manager preparing for a grand opening. "The flowers should go in the dining room," he announced. "The drinks stay outside until guests arrive. And don't forget, dinner starts exactly at 6. I poured myself a cup of coffee without responding. "Did you hear me?" he asked. I did. "Good. Timing matters." I almost smiled. If only he knew how important timing really was. Around, Emma arrived carrying 2 desserts. Michael greeted her before I reached the door. "Perfect," he said. "Just put those in the kitchen." Emma looked at me for a second before setting the boxes down. I could tell she wanted to laugh. Michael had spoken to her like she was one of his employees. When he disappeared upstairs, she leaned close and whispered, "Really believes this is his show." "That's why today has to happen," I replied quietly. At 3 o'clock, David Collins arrived wearing jeans and a navy button-down shirt instead of a suit. Anyone meeting him for the first time would assume he was just another family friend. Michael shook his hand confidently. Glad you could make it. Welcome to the house. David smiled politely. Thank you for inviting me. He never corrected him. Neither did I, not yet. By 5:30, the house smelled like roasted chicken, fresh bread, and my mother's favorite apple pie. Cars began filling the driveway. My parents arrived first. My mother hugged Michael before she hugged me. Everything looks wonderful, she said while looking around the dining room. Michael has done an amazing job organizing everything. I watched my brother accept the compliment without hesitation. Somebody had to make sure everything ran smoothly. He replied. My father gave me a quick hug. Thanks for hosting, sweetheart. It was one sentence, but it was the only moment all evening when someone openly acknowledged whose house we were standing in. More relatives followed. 2 cousins. My Aunt Denise. My Uncle Frank. Even Ethan arrived carrying a bottle of sparkling cider after making sure it was still okay to come. Michael stopped him in the hallway. You're a little early. Ethan looked at his watch. Dinner starts at 6. Exactly. Guests should wait in the living room until everything is ready. Ethan glanced at me. I simply nodded, asking him silently not to argue. Throughout the afternoon, Michael issued instructions to everyone. Shoes by the door. Please use coasters. Don't leave plates on the coffee table. Kids stay out of the office. Every order sounded reasonable by itself. That was what made his behavior so difficult for everyone else to recognize. They saw an organized host. I saw a man giving commands inside a home that wasn't his. Dinner began exactly at 6 because Michael insisted it would. He stood at the head of my dining table explaining where everyone should sit without asking me. He placed himself beside our father and directed me toward the opposite end. You'll be closer to the kitchen if we need anything, he explained. No one objected. I quietly moved to the seat he had chosen. Halfway through dinner, Aunt Denise complimented the house. Sarah, you've made this place beautiful. Before I could answer, Michael smiled proudly. We've made a lot of improvements over the last couple of months. My mother nodded. Michael's always had an eye for organization. Uncle Frank laughed. Sounds like you're running the place now. Michael raised his glass slightly. Somebody has to. The table laughed with him. Everyone except Emma, David, Ethan, and me. My father looked uncomfortable but remained silent. I noticed Ethan gripping his fork tighter than before. Michael continued talking about future plans. I'm thinking the office would work better as another bedroom, and the backyard could use a fire pit, maybe even a small workshop in the garage. He spoke about remodeling my house the way someone discusses renovations already approved. Then he turned toward me. You still haven't moved those storage boxes out of the garage, have you? Not yet. You should do it this week. We need the space. My mother smiled. That sounds like a good idea. I slowly placed my fork on my plate. The room suddenly felt very quiet, even though everyone was still eating. Michael didn't notice. He continued explaining how much more efficient the house would become after a few more changes. Finally, he looked at me. Sarah, could you clear these plates before dessert? It wasn't what he asked, it was how he asked it. Calm, confident. Certain I would simply obey? I looked around the table. My family was waiting. Some were smiling, others looked uncertain. No one understood they had just witnessed months of behavior condensed into a single moment. I stood up. Michael smiled, assuming I was going to the kitchen. Instead, I walked into my office and returned carrying my laptop along with a small remote control. Emma quietly dimmed the lights without saying a word. Michael frowned. What are you doing? I connected the laptop to the television mounted above the fireplace. My heart was beating faster than it had in years, but my voice came out surprisingly calm. Before dessert, I said, looking around the room. There's something I'd like everyone to see. Michael gave a confused laugh. Sarah, now isn't really the time. I met his eyes for the first time all evening. Actually, I said, picking up the remote, I think it's the perfect time. Every conversation in the dining room stopped at once. The only sound left was the soft hum of the television as the screen came to life. Michael looked from me to the TV, then back again. Sarah, he said with an uneasy laugh, whatever this is, we can talk about it later. I shook my head. We've been saying later for 2 months. I picked up the remote. Tonight, I'd rather let everyone see what I've been seeing. The first video began playing. It showed Michael standing in the living room a few weeks earlier with his 2 friends. The timestamp appeared clearly in the corner. Everyone watched in silence as one of the men asked how long Michael planned to stay. Then Michael's own voice filled the room. Long enough to get this place functioning properly. My mother smiled awkwardly. Well, he was probably joking. I didn't respond. The video continued. Sarah avoids conflict. She complains, then she adjusts. I saw my father's eyes move toward me. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's taken out of context. I pressed pause for only a second before letting the clip continue. It's basically my house now. She just hasn't admitted it yet. The room fell completely silent. Nobody laughed this time. Michael leaned forward. That isn't what I meant. I looked at him calmly. Then let's keep watching. The next clip showed him explaining to his friends that my office would eventually become his bedroom because I didn't really need that much space. Then another recording played. He was speaking on the phone while I was at work. She'll stop seeing that boyfriend eventually. He distracts her. Somebody has to help her make better decisions. Ethan lowered his eyes toward the table. My mother looked confused. Michael, you said that. I was frustrated. You were making plans for my life? I answered quietly. Without asking me, he opened his mouth, but no words came out. I clicked to the next file. A photograph filled the screen. It was the laminated house rules sheet sitting beside my coffee maker. Then another photograph appeared showing the cleaning schedule he had assigned me. Then another showing the budget he had created for my finances. David quietly handed copies of each document around the table. My Aunt Denise adjusted her glasses as she read. Uncle Frank frowned. Wait. You actually made a budget for Sarah's money. Michael looked defensive. She isn't good at long-term planning. The entire table turned toward me. I almost laughed at the absurdity of hearing that from someone who hadn't paid his own rent in months. Instead, I reached for another folder. This is a list of every full-time job Michael was offered over the past 4 months. Michael's face instantly lost color. Where did you get that? You told Mom nobody would hire you. I placed the printed emails on the table. The truth is that you turned them down. My mother picked up the first page, then the second, then the third. Each one showed another interview declined or another offer rejected. Michael, she whispered. You said nobody wanted you. He looked away. Those jobs weren't good enough. Good enough. My father repeated quietly. It was the first time he had spoken in nearly 20 minutes. You told us employers weren't calling. Michael rubbed his forehead. I didn't want everyone worrying. We already were worrying, my father replied. Sarah opened her home because she thought you had no options. Nobody touched their food anymore. The birthday dinner had completely disappeared. This wasn't a celebration now. It was the first honest family conversation we'd had in years. I clicked once more. There's one last thing. Rachel's written statement appeared on the screen. She had agreed to let me share part of what she told me, as long as I removed anything personal about their marriage. I read only one paragraph. Michael believed that making every decision for me was the same as taking care of me. When I disagreed, he called me emotional instead of listening. Losing his job didn't create that behavior. It simply made it impossible to ignore. I lowered the paper. Michael stared at the table. She never understood me. Neither did I admitted. Until now. My mother began crying quietly. Michael, is this true? He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he looked around the room and realized there was nowhere left to hide. Every excuse he had used for years suddenly sounded hollow. I was trying to help, he said softly. Nobody else was willing to step in. Step in? Ethan asked for the first time all evening. You threw me out of Sarah's house? Michael didn't answer. My father slowly stood from his chair. I'd seen my dad angry only a handful of times growing up. This wasn't loud anger. It was disappointment, and somehow that felt heavier. This entire time, he said, your sister was giving you a place to rebuild your life. He looked directly at Michael. And instead of thanking her, you tried to run hers. Michael stared at the floor. Dad. No. My father's voice remained calm. I've stayed quiet too many times. Then he turned toward me. Sarah. His eyes filled with regret. I should have listened when you called. My mother covered her face with both hands. I kept telling you to be patient, she whispered. I thought I was keeping the family together. I walked over to her and gently squeezed her shoulder. I know. No, she said through tears. I was protecting the wrong person, Di. For the first time in my life, I heard my mother admit that Michael had been treated differently. It didn't erase the past, but it mattered. Michael finally looked at me. His voice was barely above a whisper. I honestly thought I was making things better. For who? I asked. He couldn't answer. I reached into my office bag and pulled out a large sealed envelope. I placed it on the table in front of him. Everyone watched silently. Michael looked down at it, then back at me. What's this? I met his eyes one last time before sliding the envelope closer. These, I said calmly, are the real rules. Michael stared at the envelope for several seconds before touching it. The room had gone so quiet that I could hear the clock above the fireplace ticking. He opened the flap carefully, almost as if he expected something inside to hurt him. The first page was the formal notice David had prepared. It stated that Michael had 7 days to remove his belongings and leave my home. The second page listed several apartments within his price range, including one that offered reduced deposits for tenants beginning new jobs. The third contained information about temporary assistance programs. Behind that was a list of 12 positions currently hiring people with his experience. I had highlighted 3 that offered benefits and immediate start dates. Michael flipped through the pages slowly. His face changed with each one. Confusion became embarrassment, then something quieter. You already planned all this, he said. I planned a safe way for this to end. He held up the move-out notice. You're evicting me in front of everyone. I'm giving you written notice in front of the same family you used to pressure me. His eyes moved toward our parents, but neither of them rescued him. My mother wiped her cheeks. My father stood behind his chair with both hands resting on the wooden back. Michael looked at David. Is this legal? David answered calmly. Yes. Sarah has followed the appropriate process. If you leave within the stated period, there will be no need for additional action. Michael dropped the papers onto the table. So this whole dinner was a trap? No, I said. The dinner was your idea. You wanted everyone to see how this house was being run. I simply let them see. A few relatives looked down, perhaps remembering how easily they had laughed when Michael called himself the person in charge. He pushed his chair back and stood. I made mistakes, but this is humiliating. Being humiliated is what happened when you dismissed my relationship in front of Ethan. It happened when you made rules for me, monitored my money, and treated my house like something you were entitled to manage. Tonight is accountability. His mouth tightened. You sound just like Rachel. Maybe that should tell you something. The sentence landed harder than I expected. Michael looked away. For a moment, I thought he might argue again. Instead, his shoulders dropped. 7 days? He asked. 7 days. My mother started to speak, but my father gently touched her arm. She stopped. It was a small gesture, but I understood what it meant. For once, they were not going to negotiate my boundary for Michael's comfort. The rest of the evening ended quietly. Nobody wanted dessert, though Emma eventually cut the cake because she said my father still deserved to have a birthday. Michael went upstairs before anyone left. My relatives hugged me on their way out. Some apologized for not noticing what had been happening. Others admitted they had noticed something but had dismissed it as sibling tension. Aunt Denise held my hands and said, "You should never have had to prove you belonged in your own home." Ethan stayed behind to help clean. When we were alone in the kitchen, he picked up the laminated house rules sheet from the counter. "What are you going to do with this?" he asked. I looked at it one last time. "Keep it." He raised an eyebrow. "Why?" So I remember how slowly unreasonable things can start feeling normal. Michael spent the next 2 days mostly inside the guest room. On Monday morning, he came downstairs carrying a box of books and asked whether I could drive him to see one of the apartments on the list. I almost said yes automatically. Then I stopped myself. "There's a bus route 2 blocks away." I told him. He stared at me, surprised. "You won't drive me. You need to start handling things yourself." He nodded slowly. There was no argument. That afternoon, he returned with an application. The apartment was small but clean, and the manager had agreed to hold it for 48 hours. Michael called one of the employers I had highlighted. By Wednesday, he had an interview. By Friday, he had accepted an operations coordinator position. The salary was lower than he believed he deserved, but for the first time, he didn't complain. On the 7th day, he carried his last box to a rented van. My parents came to help, but I made it clear that Michael was responsible for organizing the move. Before leaving, he stood in the kitchen looking around at the room he had rearranged months earlier. I had already returned the mugs, dishes, and spices to their original places. The framed photo of my grandparents was back on the windowsill. The thermostat note was gone. The house rules sheet remained inside a drawer. "I really did think I was helping," he said. "I believe you thought that." He looked at me. "That isn't the same as saying I was." "No," he swallowed. "I don't know when I became like this. Probably when everyone kept protecting you from hearing no." He glanced toward our parents in the driveway. "Including you." The truth hurt, but I nodded. "Including me." He looked down at the keys in his hand. "I'm sorry, Sarah. It wasn't a dramatic apology." He didn't cry or promise to become a different person overnight. That made it feel more real. "I accept the apology," I said. "But trust will take time." "I know." He walked toward the door, then stopped. "Can I call you?" "Not for a while." His face fell slightly, but he nodded. "Okay." After he left, I closed the door and stood alone in the hallway. The house was silent, not the tense silence I had lived with for months. This silence felt open, peaceful. Mine. My parents came inside a few minutes later. My mother sat at the kitchen table and cried again. She apologized for every time she had told me to let something go because Michael was older. My father admitted that his silence had never been neutral. "Every time I avoided choosing a side," he said, "I was choosing the person causing the problem." I didn't forgive everything in one afternoon. Real family healing doesn't happen that quickly. But for the first time, they listened without asking me to make their discomfort easier. That was a beginning. 3 months later, Michael sent me an email instead of calling. He said he had kept the job, paid down part of his debt, and started meeting with a counselor recommended through his employee program. He didn't ask to visit. He simply wrote, "I'm learning that being useful is not the same as being in control." I read the message twice before responding. I told him I was glad he was doing the work. 6 months after he moved out, we met for coffee in a public place. He looked tired but steadier. He listened more than he spoke. When I told him Ethan and I were planning a trip, he didn't offer advice. He just said he hoped we enjoyed it. That small moment more than any grand apology could have. Michael and I are not as close as we once pretended to be, but we are more honest than we have ever been. My parents no longer use family as an excuse to ignore boundaries. When my mother asks me for help now, she also accepts no as an answer. My father speaks up sooner, even when it makes the room uncomfortable. As for my house, it feels like home again. Ethan visits whenever we choose. The coffee mugs are exactly where I want them. Sometimes I leave a light on simply because I can. The laminated rules are still in the bottom drawer beneath the dish towels. I don't keep them because I'm angry. I keep them because they remind me that losing control of your life rarely happens in one dramatic moment. It happens through small permissions, repeated compromises, and the fear of being called selfish. Michael thought the real rules were about schedules, visitors, money, and order. They weren't. The real rules were simple. Kindness does not create ownership. Family does not erase consent. And help without respect is just another form of control. I didn't teach my brother those rules by destroying him. I taught him by finally refusing to protect him from consequences. And in the process, I learned them too. The first morning after he left, I sat alone at my kitchen island with a cup of coffee and watched sunlight move across the floor. Nothing extraordinary happened. No celebration, no dramatic victory. Just quiet safety and the certainty that I no longer needed anyone's permission to protect what I had built. Sometimes karma isn't watching someone lose everything. Sometimes it's watching them finally carry their own weight while you stop carrying it for them. And if someone you loved mistook your kindness for weakness, how long did it take you to finally say enough? About a year later, I was repainting the guest room when I found an old sticky note tucked behind a bookshelf. It simply read, "Remember to ask before changing anything." I smiled before peeling it off and throwing it away. A year earlier, I probably would have kept it as another reminder of everything that had happened, but I no longer needed reminders. The lessons had already become part of me. Ethan and I eventually got engaged, and one of the first conversations we had while planning our future wasn't about wedding venues or furniture. It was about boundaries. We promised each other that our home would never become a place where kindness was expected but respect was optional. Looking back, I realized my biggest mistake had never been letting my brother stay with me. I would probably make that same decision again if someone I loved genuinely needed help. My mistake was believing that protecting someone's feelings was more important than protecting my own peace. There's a difference between offering support and surrendering your life. I didn't understand that until I almost lost the place that represented everything I had worked for. Michael still sends me a message every few weeks. Most are simple updates about work, his apartment, or our parents. Sometimes he asks for advice. The biggest difference is that now he waits for an answer instead of assuming he already knows it. Trust hasn't magically returned, and maybe it never will be exactly what it once was. But respect has started to grow where entitlement used to live, and that's a far stronger foundation than forced closeness ever was. My parents changed too. My mother catches herself before saying, "He's your older brother," and sometimes she even laughs about how often she used to repeat it. My father no longer hides behind silence when something feels unfair. Watching them learn alongside me reminded me that people can change, but only after they stop being protected from the consequences of their choices. Every now and then, friends ask why I never threw away the laminated house rules sheet. The truth is simple. I don't keep it because I'm angry. I keep it because it reminds me that losing yourself rarely happens overnight. It happens one small compromise at a time. One apology you didn't owe. One boundary you were talked into ignoring. One moment when keeping the peace became more important than keeping your self-respect. That single piece of laminated paper reminds me to never let that happen again. My house still isn't perfect. The floors squeak in the hallway. The backyard fence needs another coat of paint. The kitchen cabinets have a few scratches from years of use. But every decision inside those walls belongs to the people who actually live there and respect one another. That's what makes it a home. If there's one thing I hope anyone listening to my story remembers, it's this: helping family should never require giving up your dignity. The people who truly love you won't ask you to disappear so they can feel bigger. And if someone mistakes your kindness for permission to control your life, don't wait until you've lost your peace before reminding them where the real boundaries are. So tell me honestly, if someone moved into your home and slowly started acting like they owned it, how long would you have stayed silent before saying, "Enough"?